I Once Had a Car, or should I say, It Once Had Me, by Kurt Ringquist. This may just be a guy thing, I'm not sure. Girls have relationships with their cars, I know, but they tend not to be physical relationships. Guys polish and pet their cars and have deep, long-lasting feelings of devotion and romance about them. Guys are way more devoted to their cars than they are to their god or their favorite brand of beer. Hopefully not more than their spouses or kids, though sometimes it can be close. Guys are sick when it comes to cars, and other things, but that's a different story. If your first relationship colors all of your future relationships, then I think I'm in trouble on this whole car attachment, physicality, devotional thing. You see, my older sister turned 16 and got her license, and my dad went right out and bought a Daimler sports car. It was English racing green, in other words black for all practical purposes, and had had its regular front end replaced with a nose that made it look like a Jaguar XKE. It was very cool. In order to not appear too insane to my mom, Dad insisted that the car was really for him, but that my sister could use it. I go into this because it sets the scene for my pathetic first car experience. Here is my older sister, ink on the license still wet, and she's driving around in a damn race car that could, and in the hands of her boyfriend did, go 120 miles per hour. We flash forward a few years to the time when the ink on my license is still wet. Am I provided with the use of a car? Of course I am. It would be unfair for me not to be, and naturally my parents were incredibly fair. I was allowed to use my mom's car when she wasn't using it. Now how bad could this be, you may ask? Was it a boring station wagon? The kid in that 70s show drove one of those, and it has its advantages with girls and so forth. A little stodgy perhaps, and not one to impress your guy friends, but doable. Did I drive Mom's station wagon? I did not. Mom had recently turned in her station wagon for something smaller. Something she considered sporty, something she thought was cute and had been made even cuter by the ordering of a custom color paint job. Are you starting to feel scared? Well, go with that feeling. I was allowed the rare privilege of driving my mom's pink Ford Pinto. I'll let that sink in for just a minute. Yes, I am a 16-year-old heterosexual guy type, and the car I get to use with my brand new driver's license is a pink Pinto. We are talking Pepto-Bismol pink, friends. Had I been part of the popular crowd at school, this would have sealed my fate. Fortunately, I ran with the film and theater nerds, and at least a couple were gay, and therefore rather envious of my gay-mobile. The others just made fun of me, and I could hardly blame them for that. Hell, I made fun of me, and I was me at the time. Needless to say, my first order of business was buying my own damn car, so I got me a job and started saving. This is what kids did then. It would not have occurred to me to whine and wheedle and try to shame my mom and dad into getting a different car for me, mostly because, had I done that, my dad would have surgically removed my ass and handed it to me in a touching ceremony. You got what you got, and if you didn't like it, you figured out a way to fix it, period. I saw an ad in the paper for a 1963 Chevy Corvair. If you don't know the Corvair, it's the car that Ralph Nader has to thank for the renown that eventually enabled him in 2000 to get just enough votes to make sure that George Bush got elected president instead of Al Gore. Thanks, Ralph. Ralph, I call him Ralph, he calls me not at all, wrote a book called Unsafe at Any Speed about the Corvair. As a former Corvair owner, I can tell you that Ralph was not totally wrong there, though I would quibble and say that under 15 miles per hour, the Corvair was pretty safe. As long as you kept the little vent window, remember those, open at all times to prevent the carbon monoxide buildup, that was one of the Corvair's little, let's call them idiosyncrasies. I went to the house. I can still, many, many years later, picture that car sitting in the owner's driveway with the brilliant autumn afternoon sun shining on it, waiting just for me, and took a look at the car. Right off the bat, I noticed that the Corvair's most recent coat of paint had been applied by means of a 3-inch wide paintbrush. You could clearly see the brush strokes going every which way, glinting in the sunlight. The upholstery appeared to have been chewed upon by a rather savage mountain lion, and was covered with a fairly attractive chenille bedspread. I opened up the hood, which was in the back, and saw that, there was a motor in there. I went to the front and opened the trunk, looked down, and saw the pavement. Yeah, the trunk had no bottom to it, just some jagged, rusty edges of metal down there where the floor used to be. At least none of my friends would be asking me to sneak them into the drive-in movie, so there was a benefit right there. Since this was my first car purchase, I came totally by myself, in the pink Pinto, so the sellers knew immediately just how desperate I was. With the $150 asking price burning a hole in my pocket, so it would match the Corvair's trunk. I timidly asked if I could start the car. It started right up. I do not even remember driving it. I think I just said, "I'll take it," and forked over the cash. I was a car owner. You may be thinking that the next part of the story is going to be about how the sellers had filled the transmission with sawdust, or that the engine exploded on the way home, and that I learned a valuable lesson about going into my first major purchase in such a half-assed fashion. Well, I hope you're a better lottery number guesser than you are a storyline guesser, because you would be dead wrong. That car ran for me with only one very minor repair. I had to replace the emergency brake cable, which was kind of important on that car since there was no such thing as park on a Corvair, for almost 2 years. Like all of my subsequent used cars, I learned little things about the Corvair as time went on. The first thing I learned was that I needed to buy motor oil by the case and keep the case in the back seat at all times. Remember, there was no floor to the trunk. The car leaked about a quart of oil every 2 or 3 days. I remember this making me extremely popular with my girlfriend's father, who hated my guts anyway, when he saw the puddle of crude on his driveway every time I left after a visit to his daughter. After about a month, he spoke to me, a rarity, and said, "Park that damn thing in the street, you're ruining my driveway." Fair enough. The Corvair had a very cool gear shift. I love low tech, and if I ever saw low tech, this gear shift was it. On the dashboard was a plastic lever that stuck out. Above the lever was a little plexiglass window with a red line painted horizontally right down the middle. Behind the window was a metal drum, black, with the letters R, N, L, and D painted on it in white. To switch gears, simply move the lever until your letter of choice is bisected by the red line. Voila! You are in that gear. Did I mention the AM radio worked? Because it did. I could listen to Cousin Brucey on WABC, or get my news from WCBS and all that good stuff. When the weather got cold, I learned something else. The fan didn't work. This was not a problem if I was on the highway, because the engine was turning over fast enough to blow the air over the engine and into the passenger compartment, where it arrived generously laced with the aforementioned carbon monoxide. However, when I went to drive to school on a cold morning, this meant I had to hang my head out the side window like a very talented golden retriever, because the windshield was totally iced over. A minor inconvenience. Over time, electrical things started going awry. There were no amenities like power windows or sunroofs or Bluetooth receivers to mess up. The most sophisticated electronic device in the whole car was the AM radio. But I started losing the interior lights one by one. First, the dome light stopped working. Then the light that lit up the radio dial went out. Then the dashboard lights. Eventually, the only light inside the car that still worked was the little red Chevrolet symbol in the middle of the dash that lit up when your high beams were on. How cool is that? You might think that this would make it hard to see how fast I was going at night if I couldn't see the speedometer. Ah, but this is where my Corvair was brilliant. There was no need to see the speedometer at night or at any other time, because just a few weeks before the dashboard lights all went kerflooey, my speedometer needle started acting a bit strange. I was on the turnpike when I heard a funny noise. Any used car owner can tell you the horrible sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach when you hear a funny noise coming from your transportation lifeblood. It was emanating from the general direction of my speedometer. The needle started shaking a lot more than usual. Then it started fluctuating back and forth in 20-mile-per-hour increments. Soon it was shooting from 0 to 120 and back again like a Geiger counter or a VU meter recording Screaming Lord Sutch. Who? I was fascinated. It did this about a dozen times, and then the needle just broke off. No more speedometer. When I got home, because the noise was still quite alive even though the needle had passed on, I simply reached under the dashboard and unscrewed the connection between the speedometer cable and the dash. No more noise. Try doing that with your 2012 Mercedes, sucker. So now I'm driving my Corvair with the window open so I can see where I'm going and to avoid being poisoned at any speed, with no speedometer, no lights, no trunk, black paintbrush paint job, merrily dripping oil as I cruise down the highway of life. God, I loved that car. Eventually, inevitably, sadly, one night the Corvair died. I was on my way to college with my friend Jeff driving on the Hutchinson River Parkway, just the Hutch for you tri-staters, when I tried to move into the left lane to pass, stepped on the gas, and was treated to the sound of the engine revving as I went slower and slower. The transmission had passed away, dying in action as it would have wanted. I called a tow truck, and when I got to the garage, the mechanic said, without even looking at the car, your transmission's shot. On this car, I have to loosen the engine and hoist it to even check the tranny. You're looking at $300 minimum." "But I only paid $150 for the car," I said, a single tear rolling down my still downy cheek. He looked at me. Give me $25, I'll haul it away for you." I forked over the cash, my friend and I stripped some souvenirs from the car, and I bid the Corvair goodbye. In just about 2 years, that car and I had been through a lot together. It was my first automotive love. I had driven to my high school graduation in that car, drove home in it after losing my virginity, not to the car, you understand, and gone off to college. I had lovingly poured in about 240 quarts of oil. Most importantly, I had erased the specter of the pink Pinto from my already bruised psyche. Every time I moved that plastic lever so that the D was dead center behind the red stripe, it had meant I was off on another adventure. Cars do mean an awful lot, I think to most guys, but definitely to this guy, and first cars are never forgotten. You know, I do not remember seeing a puddle of oil in the seller's driveway on that bright fall morning. They must have moved the Corvair into place just seconds before my arrival. They needn't have bothered. Even if I had seen the puddle, I still would have bought that car. It was love at first sight. Brushstrokes, rotted trunk, and lion-chewed upholstery be damned. Unsafe, maybe. Unloved, never.